So a 10-column worksheet puts steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 on one page. And when I learned accounting a million years ago, I'd ride my dinosaur to school and we would do 10-column worksheets all day long. We've become more sophisticated since then, but we still talk about them once in a while because they are a good tool and a good way to learn how steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 all work together. So let's do a real simple 10-column worksheet so you get a feel for what we're talking about. So it's called a 10-column worksheet because we've got 2 columns for the trial balance, 2 for the adjusting entries we're going to make, 2 for the adjusted trial balance, 2 for the income statement, and 2 for the balance sheet. That gives us a total of 10. And in the first 2 columns, you see our familiar trial balance, which we create in step 4 of the accounting cycle. So let's pretend like there's only 2 adjusting journal entries for this company at the end of January. They've got rent expense of $1,000 and accounts receivable that are sent out at month end for money that they've earned but hadn't billed yet. So we see that they have some prepaid rent up here for $12,000. So the adjusting journal entry for the rent expense is debit rent expense for $1,000, credit prepaid rent for $1,000. The adjusting journal entry for the accounts receivable is debit accounts receivable for $500 and credit consulting fees earned for $500. So let's post those in the columns called adjustments, debits, and credits. So there's our $1,000 reduction in the asset prepaid rent. There's our $1,000 rent expense, expense to debits, expense to debits, expense to debits. There's our $500 of accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is an asset. It increases with debits. And here's the increase in our revenue account of $500. When we total up all the debits and all the credits, we get $1,500 in both columns. Well, that wasn't so hard. Now comes the part we have to be careful. We have to take this trial balance and adjust it by our adjustments. Well, what happened to cash in the adjusting process? Nothing, because adjusting journal entries never affect cash. But what happened to prepaid rent? It went from a $12,000 balance with a credit of $1,000 down to an $11,000 debit balance. What happened to supplies? Nothing. What happened to accounts receivable? Its debit balance of $0 went to a debit balance of $500. Owner's capital didn't change. Consulting fees went from $19,500 credit to $19,500 credit. Salaries expense is still a $1,000 debit. Telephone is still $1,000. And now we have rent expense, which had a $0 balance. Now is going to have a $1,000 debit balance. So when we very carefully adjust our trial balance numbers by the adjustments in the 2 columns for the adjusting journal entries, we end up with an adjusted trial balance. And just as in the trial balance and just as in the adjusting column, now the adjusted trial balance should have equal debits and credits. So in this example, we were smart enough to have all our revenue and all our expenses down here in the lower half. So to create the income statement in columns 7 and 8, we just have to move over the income statement numbers. Now, back in the old days when I did these things, we didn't have Excel, so we had big pieces of paper, and sometimes we'd have to add balance sheet accounts down here at the bottom. And you may see that in some of the homework. That's really not very fair, because nowadays if we need to add a row into the balance sheet account, we just add a row in Excel. All right, so are these 2 columns going to equal each other? No. Unless we exactly broke even, our revenue is going to be more than our expenses, or our revenue is going to be less than our expenses. So sure enough, we have $19,500 worth of revenue and $3,000 worth of expenses. So what's our net income? $19,500 minus $3,000 is $16,500. So when we add $16,500 to the left-hand side, we end up with debits and credits that are exactly equal. And columns 9 and 10 are for the balance sheet, so all we have to do is pull these numbers over, and they aren't going to balance either. They're going to be off by $16,500. So we have to add the net income of $16,500 to the right-hand side of the balance sheet. Remember, owner's capital at the beginning plus net income minus owner's drawings gives us owner's capital at the end. So let's add $16,500 to the right-hand side. And sure enough, all our debits equal all our credits. And that's all there is to the 10-column worksheet. And that's real easy for me to say, but what's going to happen is when you have to do one of these things by hand, you're going to accidentally screw up, and when you make the adjustments, you're going to have $13,000 worth of prepaid rent because you took the debit of $12,000 and added $1,000 instead of subtracting $1,000, or you're going to transpose the number when you pull it across. So these things are very challenging to do in the sense that there's a lot of details, but they're a good learning experience. And when you get out here to columns 7, 8, 9, and 10, 7 and 8 won't bounce, they'll be off by net income, and 9 and 10 won't bounce, they'll be off by net income. All right, hope that helps.